Morning, Daniel.
Good morning, Dan.
What are we chatting about on this winter wonderland week of ours?
I'm going to be a little self-indulgent, I think, with the topics this week. So you'll notice a theme here. The first thing I want to speak about is really just selecting a financial planner. What goes into that, right? The costs associated. How deep should people go? Generalists versus specialists, right? So kind of adjacent to the first topic. Should someone pick out someone who just knows everything a little bit, or someone who knows has deep specialization in one area? And then lastly, kind of graduating from financial planners. Is there ever a period where you've been working with someone for a decade or so and the fit is no longer mutually beneficial and it's time to make a change?
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Well, I think the answer to the first question is obviously you got to pick somebody named Daniel. Daniel's a great criteria for your financial planner.
I would tend to agree. I think that's the first topic. All right, so on to number two then.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, no, there's a lot that goes into selecting a financial planner. Because, let's be real about it. Generally speaking, you're engaging a professional to talk about one of the most intimate and important parts of your life. And in the majority of cases, you're making a decision, maybe whether you realize it or not, to have a lifelong or decades-long or years-long relationship with this professional or with this team. So it's a big decision.
Agreed. And we've talked about this topic before, and we've kind of went another route, which is like what to look for, right? So selecting a financial planner, we've talked about things like recognize the conflicts of interests you might have or they might have, recognize how they're compensated, right? Fee only versus fee based, etc. And then also like things like experience and how much you're going to pay them, etc. But I don't really need or think we need to talk about that again. I kind of want to take a different route, right? So like there's this irreconcilable gap between, you hire somebody or you're thinking about hiring somebody. You almost have to take a leap of faith, right? Because the advisor doesn't work for free, and you don't want to, trust them with everything before you maybe get something out of it, which creates this like weird type of relationship when someone comes to us and isn't a client yet, right? They kind of have to take this leap of faith. So when trying to hire somebody, right? I guess first and foremost, like, should you be getting quote unquote anything out of the relationship before signing like on the line besides like who are they, do you like them or not? Like, should you be looking for tangible recommendations or things from somebody before you actually become a client?
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer here, because I know lots of planners out there who like to do something called like a one-page plan, where they just sort of do like a little summary of your situation before you become a client. I know planners who will essentially do everything but build a full comprehensive plan, and there are other planners out there who literally will make you pay to meet with them in the first place. Like, they're like, I'm in such demand, I'm so busy that if you even want to spend a minute with me, you have to pay something for it. So I don't know that there's really a standardized answer to that. I think probably more importantly is thinking about what signals kind of attract you to a professional and what signals push you away from a professional.
What do you mean by that?
So, I'll give a really common example, which is something like, is the price on the website? A lot of consumers will not buy a product, sign up for a subscription, get software, whatever it is, if they can't see like a nice clean price on the website somewhere. I know personally I'm a do substantial due diligence yourself type of person, and then when I'm ready to make a purchasing decision, like, get out of my way. I'm going to give you money, so stop making that hard for me. But there's other people obviously who do kind of want to kick the tires a little bit, and not in the tire kicker sense, but just in the sense that they want to do some due diligence. They want to feel it out a little bit. They want to see a demo or have a conversation or something like that. And the trick here is, some people will say, like, I would never do business with a planner or with a firm, with any company that didn't have its price on the website. Well, that's fine, but they may actually not have their price on the website because they're specifically trying to avoid clients like you. And in turn, other firms might, have all the detail in the world about what they do on their website because they want to attract people who do that due diligence and appreciate the accessibility of that information. So sometimes it's not about whether it's good or bad that they do it. It's that they have decided to attract a specific type of client, and they have a reason and rationale for why they will or won't share that type of information. And in turn, you should be thinking about the kind of signals that are important to you and what those signals say about you when you are brought in by them, and what those signals say about the firm who's decided on those signals.
Got it. All right. Well, yeah, that makes sense. I'd assume there's a certain type of person, like you said, right, does a lot of the due diligence, probably wants it on the website as opposed to somebody maybe who doesn't value or take the time to look into that and would rather just ask in a meeting. So, like, on that topic, then, either way, sounds like there's just a leap of faith required before you actually hire the person, right? Like, you can't just think you'll get all the recommendations and the insight and everything you want from them, and then by signing, you just actually start to implement those things. I assume there's some degree of, I have to trust this person a little bit because they can't do all that work for me for free before I sign, because if they do that for everybody, they will probably be spending their time pretty inefficiently.
Yeah, there's the economics of information. We've touched on it in the podcast before, but it's the academic theory around sort of the price shopping activity, right? When you try to find the best deal for the best value. And the challenge is twofold here. On your side as the consumer, that search is costly, right? It's taking up your time. It's taking up your energy. It might be costing you real money, right? Whether you're driving to appointments or whatever it is. And in turn, on the firm side, they can only afford to spend so much time kind of advertising. And I don't mean like in the newspaper ad sense, but just the holistic package of like getting your attention, meeting with you, explaining their services, and then getting to the point where you do really need to make a decision about whether you're going to buy what they're selling or not. And the challenge here is that financial planners and the service they provide are expensive. I can tell you in our practice, it costs us around $5,000 a year in hard dollar staffing, technology, compliance, et cetera, costs per client. And so if somebody says, I really want to get your attention for 10 hours of meetings, 15 hours of conversations. If that's me, if they're saying like, Dan, I want your attention, I can tell you in business terms, it's going to cost the firm $2,000-$3,000 just to get to the point where they then say, maybe I'll become a client or maybe I won't become a client. Let alone then if you're sitting in the meeting, if Anahi's sitting in the meeting, if Steph's sitting in the meeting, if there's email correspondence, if there's pre-meeting due diligence, all of this stuff. And so it really just becomes a thing of like, look, from the firm's perspective, from the financial planner's perspective, we're better off asking you to trust us fairly rapidly, right? Within 1 or 2 hours of meeting us and giving us your attention and us giving you our attention. And if you say like, well, I really need more time to trust you, that's completely understandable. But from a business end, there's tons of people out there who do trust us within an hour or two of talking to us and spending that time with us, and they are far cheaper to do business with. And so we're not going to commit excess 5, 10, 15 hours of get to know you time for a potential client, because there's an army of other people who are happy to become clients with a 30-minute initial consult and a 40-minute data review that follows that.
I wonder how much time I've cost the firm by asking you questions all the time.
I mean, we could add up the podcasts here, but I don't think that as a cost. I think of that as an investment, and I think that's money well spent.
So, do you see the trust thing? Like for a firm like us, right? My Wealth Planner, somebody in Chicago has no idea what that is, right? Mm-hmm. But if you say to someone in Chicago, like Charles Schwab, Vanguard, they know what that means. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's a more difficult thing for a firm like us as opposed to maybe some of the larger brand names because we don't have that brand recognition? Or do you think it's more trusting the individual in which you're speaking with?
People trust people. People work with people. Big brands obviously attract attention. And there's a credibility factor here. When we say we custody client assets at Charles Schwab, pretty much everybody has like flawless brand penetration on that, at least within our client base. They all know who Charles Schwab or what Charles Schwab is. They recognize that company, and they're pretty much immediately like, okay, you work with an enormous financial institution to manage client money. Most, if not all of my questions about like the safety and security of my life savings are answered by the power of that brand. I think when it comes to picking your planner and your advisor, what's sort of an interesting phenomenon is the more well-known a firm is, there often tends to be an inverse relationship in the quality of services or the scope of services. The highly recognizable brand of certain wirehouses or insurance companies often then has been built on the fact that they have created very profitable, lucrative products, and they have a very well-trained sales force to sell those products. And so, conversely, while I think putting your money at a Fidelity or a Schwab or a Vanguard is a very good idea from a safety and security standpoint, and you can rely on their brand, when it comes to the trusting relationship with the planner or the advisor, I have a very skeptical view of that because I have, as a planner, right, seen hundreds now, or probably thousands at this point, of portfolios, insurance policies, etc., being pushed and sold by these institutions that have big, well-known, recognizable brands, but they are very recognizable and profitable because they've done such a good job of separating their clients from their money.
So you mentioned how it like costs people money, right, to obviously shop different planners and stuff. And you mentioned how it's more profitable, right, to work with more people who can trust us, quote unquote, in 2-hour-long conversations as opposed to the person who needs 10 hours. So there are people who have met with us who they can't get over the fact that 2 meetings in we're asking them to do something. That being said, for somebody like that, is it just a matter of shopping more advisors, or do you think it ultimately has to be reflective on them of like I might have a trust issue here?
I don't want to get to the point where it's a trust issue because I actually I find it remarkable how quickly people are willing to trust us. I mean, truly, right? We have clients, you're listening to this, and if you think back on it, we spent less than 2 hours with most of you before you signed an agreement for us to manage your life savings and become responsible for helping you plot your financial destiny. Like that's remarkably quick trust on your part, and hopefully we've rewarded that significantly in our relationship. But by extension from that, I don't know what the best solve for that client or that consumer is. I think one option is to just go to a service provider who is just going to, you look at something like an hourly provider and say, like, look, you don't really have to trust them per se, but they have a business where they can just kind of start the clock and you can spend your money on building trust with them before you let them work on your things. And that may not be the most cash efficient or cost efficient manner for you, but that rewards the planner for spending the time with you and makes it worth the time spent on both parts until you feel enough trust to work on that. Again, I don't think that's ideal, right? And there's I believe it's I think it's Sarah Houston who did a study a number of years ago that just highlights like the more due diligence you do, there's a rapidly diminishing return. Like it's easy, relatively speaking, to avoid costly trust mistakes of trusting the wrong people. It doesn't take much time to suss out that there are bad actors there or not the right fit for you, but there's a rapidly diminishing return on the amount of time you invest in it. Past a certain point of immediate, like, can I trust you or not sort of feeling. The second part then also is just to some extent, right? Let's say it is a trust issue on some level. What is that inertia costing you, right? Let's say you work with a subpar financial advisor who will say stops short of stealing from you, but is definitely not recommending the world's best investments, the world's best insurance. They're making a lot of commissions, whatever it is. As much as I want to hate on some of these big institutional wirehouse or regional firms or insurance firms, I don't know that their clients, by and large, are actually worse off for working with them. They're just maybe not as optimally served as I'd like them to be. So there's a certain point here where you just say, whether you trust them or not, as long as they're not stealing from you, or as long as they're not, directing your money to the worst possible things, you probably are on some level better off working with somebody who spends their whole day working in finance and specializing in personal finance than not, whether they really deserve your unconditional trust or not.
You used the word specialized there, which I think is a nice segue to number 2 here. So generalist versus specialist. I know we've had this conversation a lot. I think it's an interesting one, right? So on the topic of somebody shopping advisors, right? If I, Daniel Stefanski, work for Google, right? I get a lot of equity compensation and, I want to retire at 50, right? So not a traditional retirement plan per se, right? As opposed to maybe 65. Am I better off, kind of looking for advisors that market themselves as I specialize in people that work in, big tech with equity compensation? Or am I better off, potentially going to a generalist firm that just says we do expert financial planning and clearly have the credentials, right? They say, I think like jack of all trades is a master of none. Like, is that a realistic argument to make here? Should I be looking for people who specialize in my situation, or are the majority of people you think probably better off just finding a planner who says they do really great work?
I think this is it's funny. You're going to give me mileage out of the economics of information twice, because there's the original economics of information paper, and then there's the second one that's part of the Nobel Prize package, and it's called The Market for Lemons, and it discusses the phenomenon of buying used cars. I think when people look for a signal like, I specialize in Googlers, I specialize in Amazon employees, I specialize in doctors, I specialize in cardiologists who work for Kaiser, like whatever level of specificity we go for there, we're using those as signals to tell ourselves that they must be more valuable or more particularly useful for us. And in turn, right, that may or may not actually be the case. Like, you use the Google example. I don't think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I don't think there's anything special about working for Google in planning terms that any generalist financial planner would not competently be able to work with you on. I am not aware of Google having a super duper fancy, complex equity deferred comp system, or a really, really crazy pension retirement plan where there's a lot of actuarial stuff going on. What a lot of Googlers are very, very highly well-paid, smart, hardworking people. But they're W-2s, and maybe they get some RSU comps and some bonuses, and the cafeteria plan might be pretty robust, but there's nothing super duper special there. And I think that's sort of the trick, is what many financial planners will describe as their specialty is actually just their marketing focus and their target market, but they don't have a unique or special skill set. There are definitely planning specialties that do require specialized skill sets that are very valuable, but I think the vast majority of what financial planning firms call their specialty is just their target market.
Well, I mean, can there be an argument made for something along the lines of, say I work with just people from Google, right? Equity compensation, the whole thing. You mentioned there maybe isn't anything particularly complex or nuanced about their benefits and their compensation specifically. However, time is money, right? And I'm sure there's an argument to be made for the onboarding process and getting to know them process that is expedited by knowing the vesting schedule and knowing the actual health plans that are provided through the firm, and being able to speak the lingo a little bit and feeling almost more of like an insider with people that work there, as opposed to a generalist who has to kind of learn all the Google stuff for the first time, right?
Well, I think there's a question here of, does that incur actual costs for you or not? So, I mean, take and this is just a made up example, but just to demonstrate this point, take let's say, Google specialized financial advisor, and they have a $15,000 annual minimum. Take a general subscription planner who doesn't specialize in Google, but who has a $5,000 minimum. You're at the income asset, whatever level that you are going to pay either of their minimums based on where you are in life. Question, right? If the generalist will get there and the Google guy is already there, or the Google gal is already there, but one costs 3x as much, is the value of their advice going to be so substantially different to warrant that value? And I'm not saying you should be making this decision based on the price comparison, but you raise this point of like, aren't there costs to the generalist needing to learn about your specific company and your specific plan versus working with a specialist? In some cases, yes. In other cases, depending on the service model or the fee agreement, no. And that really just becomes a question of, what is their service model, what is their fee model, and do you bear the brunt of those costs or not, depending on the nature of the relationship.
All right, well, just because maybe it's not nuanced or complex to us, right? I'm going to just stick with Google because I've already used that example, right? Just because the benefits and stuff aren't complex to us doesn't mean to them it doesn't feel overwhelming and complex, right? So if I'm a Google employee and I'm looking for a financial planner, and I see a generalist, right? Financial planning, that's their thing. And then I see somebody who has an equity comp kind of specialization or whatever the thing is. How do I, as the consumer, kind of parse out the difference between a genuine specialization and someone who is more just catering and wants to work with those people, so that's how they market?
Yeah, I think you need to think about the nature of your problem. And I recognize as I say this, you make the point about it's not complex to us. So recognizing that it is probably complex to this person, otherwise they wouldn't be looking for help in the first place. But what I like to point out here is what seems to be the probability that this would actually be a rarefied skill set. So let me give you an example. Let's say you want to move to Barbados. You want to get citizenship. You want to move your money to Barbados. You want to run a business there. You want to do all that. But today you live in California. There's probably less than 10 financial advisors or financial planners on Earth who have that knowledge and that skill set. because the market for people moving from California to Barbados is pretty darn slim in the grand scheme of things, let alone wealthy enough people where they want financial planning help and so on. That's a rarefied skill set where you say, okay, what's the probability that the average run-of-the-mill financial planner knows both U.S. rules and Barbados rules? Slim to none. Whereas when you say, equity comp, okay, well, equity comp is covered in the CFP curriculum. It's a very common form of compensation for many financial planning clients, whether they work for tech companies or startups or whether they are entrepreneurs or executives. Like, it's a very common planning problem. And so to some extent, when somebody says, like, I specialize in equity comp for Googlers, Google doesn't have unique special equity comp. They have RSUs, and at some point in their history, when they were more of a startup, I'm sure they had, stock options, ISOs, and I'm sure there's a deferred comp plan for executives at a certain stage, and none of that is special or remarkable. So I think you have to think about what is the probability that your problem is actually unique and special such that it warrants a specialist. The other example I like to call out is doctors. There's a lot of financial planning firms out there that say we specialize in doctors. There's nothing special about doctors from a planning standpoint. They are very high income W-2 employees who may have multiple retirement plans working for nonprofit or government-based systems, or they are small business owners. Neither of those are deeply, deeply complex. Doesn't mean you can't specialize in that and say, like, most of my clients are business owners or most of my clients are physicians, but when it comes to this like specialist versus generalist thing, there's very little to differentiate those. And so it just becomes this thing of, I think many financial planning specialties are target markets. My favorite one is women. There's a bunch of firms out there that say we specialize in women. Here at My Wealth Planners, I think 54% of our clients are female, but I would not say that we specialize in women because the specialized things women are, they tend to outlive their male spouses and they tend to live longer. And there's some planning considerations for that. But women are not so unique, particularly considering they are the literal majority of the population. Doesn't mean that that you can't try to market to them, cater to them, have signals that again make you feel like a better fit to a woman seeking a financial planner of that feels like they specialize in her. But when you're literally the majority of the population, it's hard to say that the world is not somewhat going to be readily accessible to you in planning terms.
That's fair. I mean, I have to think, like, if I'm a consumer though, right, and use the equity comp example again. Like, if I go to a planner, right, say you're the planner, I go, Dan, and you're a generalist. I say, I have this equity compensation. Out of curiosity, how many plans have you seen like mine? And you say, I would say I've worked with a couple people who have equity compensation, none at Google, but, I've done a dozen of these, right? Mm-hmm. But then I go to somebody else, similar price, right? I like them equally as much, right? Mm-hmm. And I say, how many plans have you worked on with equity compensation? And they say, 90% of my clients, I've done hundreds of these. Like, I feel like I would, as the consumer, all else being equal, would have considerably more confidence in that person, even though they might be just as competent as, like you said, the person who's also done the CFP curriculum, has learned equity compensation, but maybe hasn't done it as much.
Yeah. I mean, here's a really good example of this. You and I have some professional peers that we would know and recognize, and I could say any of their names and you know who I was talking about, or I could imply directly enough and you know who I was talking about. Of this group of peers, I think all of them state some degree or some gradient of being equity specialists. And as I've sort of implied here, there's not a lot that's actually that special about equity. It's just complex to consumers. It can be big dollar amounts, and so hiring a planner can sometimes just be an insurance decision. I can tell you of the ones I could name, I think most of them are probably great at equity comp. I think they probably work on equity comp the vast majority of the time. I can also think of one in particular who's posted a bunch of incorrect stuff on their social media about equity comp, but they too would look at their client or their potential client and say, oh, I've done dozens of these or hundreds of these. But if you keep doing the same thing wrong every single time, it doesn't matter that you've done it 100 times. And I'm not trying to knock experience or knowledge set or pick on anybody in particular as I say that, but all of this to say, I think the nature of your problems really requiring a specialist is a helpful screen, more so than somebody telling you that they specialize in the use of the world.
All right.
And I'll pick on us here, right? We say we're Longmont's the only financial planning firm. We love Longmont. We want to work with people here in Longmont. Spoilers, there's nothing special about Longmont, financially planning speaking. In Boulder County, we have a homestead exemption. We have some interesting things to do with like home and auto insurance, particularly around like wind and hail. And I'm already scraping the bottom of the barrel for things that are unique about Longmont. If there's anything unique about Longmont, it's that we're here and that we like to meet people face to face and work with our clients in person. and that's okay. We're happily generalists because we want to serve this community, but nobody should work with us just because we're in Longmont and they're in Longmont. And in turn, right, that doesn't mean somebody would, could, or shouldn't work with us because they're outside of Longmont.
All right, to wrap this one up, then, like, how would you respond to the argument of like the jack of all trades is a master of none? Like you mentioned, we're generalists, right? So if we're generalists, like in theory, does that mean we are not masters of one specific thing, but we might know the majority of a lot of things?
Well, and I think that goes to kind of who a lot of our clients are, right? Most of our clients are what I like to call the healthy middle American, right? They are, married couples. One works for the school district, one works at a tech company. Income is $200,000 to $400,000 a year inside the household. Maybe we have some equity comp. We probably have 2 or 3 different retirement plans in our current occupations. We probably have kids getting ready to go to college, in college right now. And so we deal with a kind of a wide variety of these things, but the planning circumstances of a lot of our clients are very similar, and they might work for a different tech company, or they might work for Boulder Valley instead of St. Vrain or something like that. But again, a lot of the things we deal with as generalists are still widely applicable, right? You bring up how many times you've seen equity comp. Actually, a whole bunch of times. But I've only seen Broadcoms once. I've only seen Hyatt's once or twice. I've only seen these companies once or twice, but they're not different in any material sense. The part here that I actually think we didn't get into, and maybe this is where we'll start to transition to the next topic, is there comes a point where you may be working with a perfectly adequate planner, but your circumstances change. And that can be a particular signal. And I think more incumbently on us as the planners, we have to know when we're out of our scope of confidence. If somebody came and said, I have $100 million, I'd like you to be my financial planner, I would be very hesitant to bring them on as a client. Not because they wouldn't be a great client, but because I would be really picking at like, okay, what services do you actually very specifically want? Because if what you want is a general financial plan with a strong estate plan and a basic portfolio management strategy, we could deliver that. But if what you want is very diversified tax sheltered business entities in multiple states and Delaware corporations and a Nevis trust, and I want somebody to pay my internet bill for me and handle my correspondence, we're not built for that. And so we would say, we love you as a potential client and your planning needs are very interesting and fun, but we're not the right fit for you, and we need to find you somebody who is.
What a natural segue. It's almost as if you have the topics in front of you.
Well, you also told me earlier, so even if I didn't, I got a decent-ish memory.
All right, so when your needs mature, service model isn't right for you, right? Why graduate to another planner? I guess first and foremost, have you ever had a client that you stopped working with because it was mutually no longer like a good fit to do so?
Yeah, and usually this is a status quo is good problem, not a somebody has grown out of us problem. So status quo is good is, hey, we've been doing planning for a while, we've gotten the investments organized, the insurance is good, the benefits at work are rock solid, and we're starting to hit a point where we're sort of just saying like, yep, carry on with carrying on, meeting after meeting, quarter after quarter. And in fairness then, there comes a point where you have to say like, look, if you want me to be there to hold your hand or to kind of make sure you stay the course, I'm happy to do that for you. But, as we often then say to even people who are not clients yet, if you don't work with us, you're probably going to be fine. Right. And that can be the case of somebody who is already working with us, where we say like, look, we're happy to keep working with you, but all things being equal, chances are if you go out and keep on the course you're on right now and don't deviate too much, you'll probably be okay without us. And if you don't want to pay to keep working with us on an ongoing basis, or you feel comfortable and confident with that, then that makes all the sense in the world.
So like in a case like that, like you as the planner probably can recognize earlier than later, like that could be the case, right? Like I'm looking at the plan. Yeah, if you just continue on this course of action for a decade or two, you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a case of maybe they weren't a great long-term fit anyways, but we took them on and maybe try to get them to be a long-term fit, or just recognizing, maybe they just want someone to speak to every once in a while, but are fine anyways? Because like we do want to work with people long-term. We're not interested in transactional relationships for a year or two. Like I guess how do you kind of think through that?
Yeah. It's interesting there. I think we've gotten better over time about turning down cases where we know that's going to be the inevitable outcome. I'm even thinking of a case from the past week or two. Would have been a great client in terms of, general planning need, circumstances, level of wealth, all of those things. But they were fairly insistent that what they really wanted was essentially just like a really thorough portfolio review and strategy. And they just didn't feel like comprehensive planning around insurance and their estate and taxes and everything else was going to be that valuable for them. They really were looking for a planner because of a portfolio thing. And we could have pitched and tried and really tried to bring them on, and we probably could have won them for the first year of service. But I think they would have ended that year going like, well, I did pay a lot for this and I got what I was looking for, but I feel like I overpaid for the specific thing I'm looking for here. And I definitely don't feel like I need an ongoing relationship. And so we'll do this for a year and move on. I'd rather just find that person, the planner who does specifically the thing they're looking for the first time, and do my good deed and help out my colleague who, could use that business, and it's their ideal client anyway. And that's exactly what we did. We went and found them somebody who was willing to take them on as a one-time project within that specific scope. So there's just that balance of, looking at it and saying, I'd rather try to screen for that as much as possible up front rather than try to kind of torture people into being, the square peg in the round hole.
Yeah, and there's only so much we can do there. Like, some people will still surprise you, and that is what it is, I think.
There's some happy surprises there, though. Two of my favorite clients were both people who were very adamant that they were going to work with us for a year, and that they were going to come in, get their plan, make sure it was all squared away, and then they were going to say adios. And we're several years in, and we see them every quarter, and they're great, fun people to work with, and they seem to enjoy the relationship as well. And we're not trying to twist their arms to stay, but we're happy to work with them and happy to continue serving them as long as they continue to find it valuable.
All right, so on that note, you mentioned, right, someone may win the lottery and they get $100 million, and now there might be some, complex estate planning and trusts and tax management that maybe is just out of the scope of our services. Can you think of any other examples where it's reasonable to maybe fire your advisor or look for somebody else? Like, maybe you move to a different state and you don't feel comfortable with their expertise in that state. Is that a thing, or is it really just when there's a significant change in wealth relative to maybe how you started the relationship?
I think state by state is a seldom realistic problem. I think country by country, it's a huge one, right? Like if you're a U.S. resident and you're moving to Canada, we're going to have to find you a Canadian specialized financial planner. There's just no two ways about it. On the other side of that, though, you mentioned wealth levels. I don't think most people are not going to undergo such significant wealth changes that it's going to change their profile. If they do, right? If it's the winning the lottery, I had $100,000 yesterday, I have $900 million tomorrow. Fair. Like that's probably substantial enough where, frankly, we probably even just need to expand the support team. Even if you worked at the same firm, you're probably going to now have enough financial stuff going on that you actually need a dedicated person who is just your advisor and nobody else's. And that there are big multifamily or single family offices out there that do that sort of thing. But on the extenuating side, I think the other one that is less cognizantly brought up is changes in the relationship dynamic. There's a lot of financial planners who specialize in particular career things. One that a number of my colleagues and friends in the financial planning specialize in is women who work in tech with equity comp. Like that's their niche, that's their specialty, that's who they appeal to, that's who they attract, that's who they serve well. And we could go back to the early conversation. I can kind of shrug and say I'm not sure that's a real specialty, but that's who they work well with, and that is what they're happy doing, and their clients are happy to work with them. But that's often then built around one person in a relationship. So then let's do the ship of Theseus here, right? You are a single woman who works in software and has equity comp, and then you get married. And you get married to a man who is a lawyer partner at a law firm, not the specialty of the original planner. And then the company goes through its big IPO on the woman's side, and now the equity comp stuff is no longer in the picture. Now we're just a plain Jane W-2. And then we have kids, and we decide I'm going to become a stay-at-home parent. And now I have the big hotshot lawyer partner, making the big bucks as an equity holder in this law firm, and I don't have any element of the original specialty or arrangement. There comes a point at which, that ship of Theseus thing comes up and you say, okay, is this still a client I specialize in and can serve as best as possible? Or have their needs and their circumstances changed and matured enough that I have to recognize I'm no longer the best planner for them, or they recognize I'm no longer the best planner for them? We also see the same thing with existing single clients who get married where the spouse is not a user of financial planners, right? Whether because they came with less money, whether because they just don't like working with other professionals, whether they're just not the type of ideal client we'd work with, where sometimes we have to say, original client A, you're great, but I have, with no disrespect to the love of your life, they are not behaving the way that clients behave with us. And we need to either try to rearrange the relationship to conform so we all get along well here, or we need to find you a different relationship that's going to work better with your spouse.
Yeah, I think those are good examples, and I've definitely seen the one before where there's just a new party added, and it doesn't always work out well. Like I could think of the one client that I parted ways with. She retired and moved in with her daughter, and her daughter's husband was a financial planner. And she's like, "Look, Daniel, it's been great, but like I'm not paying rent, and I feel obligated to move over there." And I was like, "I agree. I think you should."
Yeah, your housing situation is more important than our relationship. Yeah.
Right. and I have my thoughts about them as a professional, but that's a different story for a different day. But even so, I think just lifestyle, it kind of made sense for her, and it was mutually beneficial. But I think that's a good one, right? Like you can almost handicap yourself if you say you work with a specific person, and then 10 years later that situation and dynamic is completely changed and it no longer makes sense to continue the relationship. And I think the other one there is like you add a new party who never works with or doesn't value the professional advice, and that can create some conflicts too. I mean, we've seen that one before too. So I think those are good. But for the most part, like what about a firm? You kind of hear it, right? Like we like to say we take a team approach to everything. Like someone leaves or whatever the case may be, and now they're working with another advisor, but the same service model, same financial plan in place. Is there any times in which like they could justify, or it is justifiable to be like, well, I liked working with Daniel, but now I have to work with Dan, and I don't like Dan.
I mean, nobody likes Dan, so that's a reasonable and realistic situation. That just becomes a personal preference thing, right? I don't think you're going to be better or worse served in that way. Sometimes you hear about it, right? Somebody retires and the new succession advisor is not as attentive or doesn't seem to care or doesn't write, doesn't call, whatever the circumstance is. But I think otherwise, the practical thing there is, I think you will see more and more financial planning firms saying like, you're working with our firm, you're working with our team, you get value from all of us. But at the end of the day, people do business with people. And much as I want to tell people like, hey, everybody here at My Wealth Planners is great, and you would be lucky to work with Daniel or me or Anahi or Steph or our next planners and so on. Somebody out there, we've had a client say like, we signed up for the Dan Yerger experience. And we want to work with Dan Yerger, and if ever we're not working with you anymore, we will probably part ways. I can't hold that against them. I would entreat them to say, please love and respect what I'm building here as a practice, and that I have great confidence in Daniel. I have great confidence in Anahi. I have great confidence in all of our people, and I think they're going to do a great job for you. Please give them a chance. But I respect that some people are here because they like me, or they're here because they like you. And with that, again, they get to make their own decisions, and they may say, sorry, but I'm going to graduate because I really like Daniel, and Dan, I can't stand you.
Would you say your personality is like sandpaper?
Yeah. I am the most acquired taste, I think is the reality of life.
All right. Well, that's all I got for this week. What did that cost us? Like $2,000 or something like that?
If I do the math, I think this conversation has cost us about $275.
All right, that's
before
not bad.
Editing.
Not bad. I'll buy you lunch or something.
Well, yeah. Hey, I'll take the lunch, but again, always happy to have these conversations.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
All right, Daniel. Well, with that, I'll ask the question as always every week. What have we learned in the past week that our audience benefits from hearing about?
Yeah, so I'm going through my CFP stuff, and it's a lot, right? Like these books are virtual, which grinds my gears. I wish they were physical. But if you stack the books up, like they are, I don't know, a foot tall. Like there's a lot of. You think they're more than that?
I mean, I've still got the Cure books. I think they stacked up vertically like 18, 19 inches.
Yeah,
like
it's a lot, right? And it's interesting because there's so much knowledge in it, and you think, okay, the more knowledge I obtain, the better advisor I'll be, and that's true to an extent, right? But I've kind of realized, and I've heard it before, but I don't know, it's one of those things, like you see the quote, and they attribute it to like 8 different people, so you no longer really know who said it. But it's something, along the lines of like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think financial planning is a really great example of that, right? Like you can have all the technical knowledge and know the answer to every question that someone ever gives you and asks of you. But if they can't see that you genuinely care and want to see their situation change and are there for them in their tough times and when they genuinely need advice, it doesn't matter how much you know. And I think that's just important to kind of internalize as a planner.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and it's the thing I've had to tell you, Anahi, everybody who's ever been an advisor or planner here. You spend your first couple of years really building up the technical base, and then you spend the rest of your career staying current and really just trying to figure out how do I get clients to do the thing that best aligns to what they want out of life. And it turns out that is all about caring, and it's all about the people.
Awesome.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.
You're not going to do the what have you learned this week?
You had such a finality to the thing, Stan. My brain went into we're
talking. All right.
No.
People are going to be caught off guard. They're going to be like, wait, it ended?
Oh, I haven't hit stop yet, so we'll just come around to it here.
All right.